Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Two Middle-Aged Guys Trying to Work It All Out. I'm Chris, and as always with me is my good friend...
Dave.
Yes, Dave, welcome. So how's your week been this week, Dave?
It's been good. I got ripped off. Can I start off the episode with a story about me getting ripped off?
Yeah,
maybe a
absolutely.
public service announcement?
What happened?
Well, my wife is going to hear this, and then she's going to know the extent to which I got ripped off. I mean, it's a we, but it was really my fault. So I think I ripped my family off. But let's not worry about who ripped who off. All right, let's just focus on the message I'm going to send out to the listener community. When you are looking at something to watch, say on Amazon or on Fandango or Apple or however you do that, and a new Lawrence Fishburne, Casey Affleck movie. Casey, as you know, is the little brother of Ben Affleck. And where they're in space and like, hey, Lawrence Fishburne in space, sure, sign me up, right? He's done that before with Passengers, which is the movie with Lawrence Fishburne, obviously. Jennifer Lawrence and Lawrence Fishburne. Wait, that's weird. And Chris, who's the Star-Lord Chris all of a sudden? I wanted to say Chris Pine, but it's Chris Pratt. Sure, Chris Pratt. And of course, Event Horizon. I think he's done some other movies where he's a captain of a spaceship. But again, here he is playing a captain of a spaceship. You say, hey, that looks neat. I think I'll spend $25 on that one to get it early. Do not do it. Do not spend a penny on this movie, folks. I suffer from insomnia, and this movie put me to sleep about an hour in. Now, my wife stayed awake, I think just out of spite, so that when it was over, she could tell me, that's the worst movie I've ever seen. I did wake up in the last minute, got to see the ending, which was... even dumber than the rest of the film. Listen, just don't do it. I know it sounds like a good deal, $25 to see a Lawrence Fishburne in space movie. It's one of those, like, get this Hollywood movie while it's still in the theaters. This movie hasn't been in the theaters for a long time. It was in the theaters about, like, one showing exactly. Free Jack made more money than this movie. That's how bad it is. So I thought I'd open the episode with a public service announcement. Don't do it. And then when my wife hears this, she'll be like, $25. It's going to be that. And she will be very right to hit me with a frying pan or whatever. She's going to throw salt in my eyes like Chung-Li and beat me up like I'm Jean-Claude Van Damme. I won't spin kick her back. I'll lose
good.
The kumite. I'm going to stop with this line of discussion because it's getting weird.
I think you mixed Bloodsport and Street Fighter 2.
Yep.
I didn't quite understand.
She'll be like the Menendez brothers, and I'll stop right now.
So I have two questions about this.
Wait,
Number
Chung-Li, that's right. Was that the bad guy's name?
No, in Bloodsport? Uh-uh.
So Bolo Young, what was his name then?
Oh, I don't he had
okay,
him
all
in
right.
the movie, but no, Chung-Li is Street Fighter. Anyway.
Chung-Li is Street Fighter. I'm going to look this up later.
All right.
TMAG special episode. Deep dive into the cast.
Please do not make me do a special episode on Street Fighter.
Well, I know. I was thinking Bloodsport, part 2.
Part 2. Yeah, okay, sure. We could do that. Anyway, so two questions about this Lawrence Fishburne movie. I don't think you said the title of this movie.
I didn't. Oh, you right. I'm just going off of you won't see the title. You'll just see Lawrence Fishburne's head in space. You'll be like, oh, okay, that's a winner. It's called Slingshot.
Okay, Slingshot.
Yeah.
And then the second point I'll make is $25 to fall asleep. I mean, there are worse deals to be had there, I guess.
That's true, I guess. I could have just taken the frying pan to the head.
Was this a rental or do you own it?
I own it. It's forever in my Fandango.
Anytime you have insomnia, you've got the cure.
I fire up this awful movie.
All right. Well, I'm very sorry that you got ripped off. It happens, right? We've all picked bummer movies and had to sit through them.
Yeah, that's true. But at least if you're at the theater, you can get popcorn. You can find something about the experience. In this case, I was just embarrassed and then afraid to tell my wife how much I spent on the movie. It's the last episode of TMAG, guys.
Now this isn't going to drop for a few weeks, so you've got a little
I've got
bit
a
of
little
a stay,
time. Yeah.
stay of execution there, so it'll be fine.
This is I'm dead man walking right now. That's what I am.
Yes. All right. Well, aside from your experience with the Lawrence Fishburne in space, I believe you have a listener email for us.
I do. We made a promise to our listeners. If you communicate with us, we will read your communication to everyone else. That doesn't sound like a very good deal now that I
it
say
does,
that out loud.
but it's working so far.
So we got an email, which is not something we've gotten. I mean, we've gotten a few of them, but we don't get a lot. Mostly, I've dealt with it's YouTube comments or Facebook comments or Facebook messages. But an email from Omega Omelet, which that's either the worst omelet you've ever had or the best omelet. It's like the last. I'll never, I can't top the Omega omelet. Sounds delicious. Now I'm gonna go get an omelet. An email from Omega Omelet. This is what he had to say, or she had to say. Just found your podcast from the Wii episode and decided to start from the beginning. When getting up to the computer episode, I was wondering if either of you did anything with more modern software and hardware, or if you'd stayed out of it. I, for example, homebrewed my 3DS and Wii U and jailbroke my iPhone. Do either of you two dabble in that side of modern technology, trying to gain more control over more lockdown operating systems? Love the podcast. Keep it up. Excited to listen to more. Thank you. First of all, this is very kind. I'll start at the end there. This is a very kind closer. Really appreciate that. But, I actually, this is a great question, right? And it's, honestly, I've dabbled a lot in this. First of all, my whole career has been in technology management. So I do enjoy this, and I've we hacked we hacked a DS Lite here at my house, my son's. I hacked Wii U's, and you have my hacked Xbox 360. Chris has that. I have a hacked PlayStation 3, and I've hacked several minis for friends and family. I've rooted Android phones, although I stopped doing that when I bricked one that I could not bring back to life. So, yeah, absolutely. I continued messing around, breaking stuff, and trying to make things do what it wasn't supposed to do.
Yeah, same here. And probably more kind of like on the video game side of things, like you just kind of described for us. The first thing I ever jailbroke or custom firmware or whatever you want to call it was a PSP, which is about the easiest thing in the world to put a custom firmware on. So it was a great starting point. And when I, got a taste of that, then, 3DS's, Wii's, of course, Wii U's, consoles, just like you were saying. And then, this is a little bit different from what he's talking about, but like optical drive emulation, where you remove the CD-ROM drives from old consoles.
You've done
and put
that?
in. I've done that. Yeah, I put in like SD card readers so that you can, And my whole point to doing it is the preservation of it, right? So these lasers, especially in Saturns and Dreamcasts and that sort of thing, they don't last forever. And so having some way to continue to use the actual hardware is really important to me. So I've continued to dabble in that. On the PC side of things, it's been 15 years, maybe longer, since I've built a PC. I did kind of fall out of that a little bit. I'm much more interested in just buying what I want already put together and not have to mess with it. So, on that side of things, I haven't kept up and I haven't done quite as much. I still know what processor's current and what, DDR5 RAM is and which version of what graphics card is the highest. I keep up with it that much, but I don't get into the hardware or do a whole lot as far as that goes. I tried to do the Linux thing for a while. I thought I'd be cool with that, and it was just more headache than it was worth for me. So I bailed.
A lot of fun.
No, I mean, if I just had to use it, fine. I have absolutely no problem with that. But supporting it and like keeping everything running and, I mean, like and a lot's changed since I messed with it, to be fair. But when I dipped my toe into it, I mean, it took me 6 months to get my wireless card working. And that's a lot of time to invest in something that Windows does automatically. So, that's kind of my story with it, to answer Omega Omelet's question.
What optical drive systems have you replaced the optical drive in?
Saturn and Dreamcast. And I did not replace the optical drive in a PlayStation, but they have the PSIO, which plugs into the parallel port in the back of the PlayStation. I did one of those as well.
That is really cool. Have you ever done an HDMI upgrade on one of those older systems? Put an actual HDMI port in?
I haven't. I went the route of getting an upscaler. So all of my old systems go out through SCART connection and then into the upscaler to handle it that way. At the time I was buying and doing those kinds of things, all the different HDMI mods were really in their infancy. There wasn't a lot of them. So going SCART RGB out to an upscaler was the way I went to, as far as that goes.
So I hope, Omega Omelet, that SCART RGB out to an upscaler. I hope that's nerdy enough for you, because that's about as nerdy as it gets. That is really cool. I remember the first thing I ever modded with the game system was an Xbox, an old Xbox, and I got a non-solder mod chip that you did not have to solder in, and I could not get it to work with the non-solder ones. Had this like little plastic thing you put on the chips that you would then put the connections inside the plastic things. And it would just fall out. It was not a good idea. So I shipped it to someone to have them. They actually soldered it in, sent it back to me, configured it, and for years I used that to play games on, and then it became a media server until it died. We used the heck out of that. The Xboxes were a lot of fun to mess with when had been modded. So yeah, I would say yes to your question. I think that both of us have played around with that a lot.
Absolutely. But, Dave, as we move out of the listener email section of the show, something you're always doing to me is you're bringing these games to me. You're making me play trivia or some kind of association game or something like that.
Asking you about glam rock stars.
Yes, those types of things. Like you're frequently doing that. But I thought in honor of the topic today, I would do the same to you. So I have the opening game this week.
All right.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, this is called What's More Valuable. Okay, I'm going to give you two items that fit inside, like the collecting kind of space. And I need you to tell me which one sold for more money at auction. Now, that means, dear listener, these values could fluctuate, but as of recording, these are actual items actually sold in the actual world. All right? You ready, Dave?
Yeah. Did WADA help you prepare this?
This is not a sponsored segment.
Okay,
no.
All right. Our listeners may be wondering, what is a WADA? It's a video game thing.
Yeah, one of the items was a WADA auction.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can get all the controversy surrounding that onto our podcast. So, yes, here we go, though. First one, not the WADA question. All right, first one. What's more valuable, Superman #1 or the first appearance of Spider-Man?
I'm going to go with, Superman #1 is older. First appearance of Spider-Man. I know Spider-Man #1 is very valuable. I think the first appearance of Spider-Man is in a Fantastic Four comic, but I could be totally wrong on that. Oh, this is a tough one. I'm going to go with the first appearance of Spider-Man, but I'm not confident.
You are wrong. Superman #1 is worth more. 5.3 million versus 3.6 million.
And Nicolas Cage bought them both, right? Like
he may have. I don't
last
know.
pennies. What was the first appearance of Spider-Man? Was it in a Fantastic Four comic or?
So I don't know where that happened.
What?
I just looked up the value. That's a different game.
Amazing Fantasy, which was one of the anthology type series, or where they.
There you go.
Number 15. Okay, yeah. I knew that it was not Spider-Man #1, right? So, but I could not recall what it was. But that's it.
All right, here we go. What's more valuable? The first production run sealed Legend of Zelda for NES or an early production run sealed Super Mario Bros. For NES?
There was a lot of controversy about all of these
there was
WADA auctions, and there was a time when I probably remembered what this was, just because there was so much news about it, and people were saying, well, this is more valuable than this. Those Super Mario ones always seem to go for like ridiculous amounts. They all did, but I'm going to go with Super Mario just because I remember some of those numbers being just stupid, so I'm going to go with that.
You are correct, but they are closer than you might think. Super Mario Brothers, an early production run, sold for $720,000, and the first production run sealed Legend of Zelda sold for $705,000.
That's very close.
Nipping on the heels of Mario there.
Yeah, and those values are starting to drop. I don't know if you followed any of that. There's a crash and a correction in the video game market. People were very bored during COVID, and they bought a lot of stuff.
Yes, they did, and a lot of video games.
It's interesting how that's going to tie into our topic today.
Yeah. All right, this one you're gonna like, and it's an interesting one. I was certainly surprised. What's more valuable, the complete series of The Norm Show on DVD,
Oh, well.
or Power Rangers seasons 4 through 7 on DVD?
Goodness. Man, I'm wondering if there's an aspect of this isn't available on streaming, so that, oh boy. Of course, I mean, obviously, I think that, the Norm Show should beat the Power Rangers, but just barely, because the Power Rangers are, they're not awesome. I can't even joke about it. I'm going to go with the Power Rangers, just because I suspect there's some sort of weird streaming thing, and the Norm Show, I don't know if it was beloved.
Well, you are wrong.
Oh, okay. I'm glad
The
to be
Norm
wrong.
Show on DVD, $500. Power Rangers seasons 4 through 7, $215.
All right. Wow.
So there you go.
$500.
For the Norm Show on DVD, yeah.
Norm's looking down on us laughing.
To be fair, it is not available anywhere else. If you want to see that, you're going to have to fork out the money for the DVD.
Really? You can't stream it anywhere. I mean, I think it was an ABC show or CBS show. I think Worldwide Pants.
I was going to say
Letterman's
Fox,
production company,
but don't quote me on that. I
wouldn't Norm had a lot of TV shows.
Yeah, he did. You're right.
He did. A Minute with Harry. I can't remember. He had several. And I can't. A Minute with Stan Hooper was one where he owned like an inn or something. It was kind of Bob Newhart-ish, which makes sense, because Norm was Bob Newhart-ish, right? I mean, they both had the very same sort of weirdness about them, which made them both hilarious. That's it. So there's so many Norm shows. Sports show. Norm had a show called The Sports Show for a while. He had a lot of stuff.
He had the Norm Show, and then he also had the Norm Macdonald Show, didn't he?
I don't know. I know he had the Norm Show, but it's entirely possible he had the Norm Macdonald Show at some point too. So.
All right. Well, yeah, I figured you'd like that he is the more valuable versus
I am
Power
very
Rangers.
happy. I was glad to be wrong on that one.
All right, so the topic today is collecting, and that's kind of a broad topic.
It is. You said hoarding, right? You
No,
said the topic
no.
is hoarding.
No, it's with a C. It's a collecting.
Ooh.
Collecting sound, yeah.
Okay.
So, I think we start this conversation with today. Like, what do we collect today? What takes our time? What takes our attention? What takes our energy when you're talking about collecting? Dave, start us off.
I'm a non-collector. It's not that I don't want to, because I do want to. The spirit is willing, but the wallet is weak. But there's actually a lot to it, actually, when we get into this. But right now, I would say that truly, and I don't even know if we can count this. I think that we should tee this up as a question of whether or not this should count as we go through this. Probably the collection that I pay the most attention to is my digital movie collection on Voodoo Fandango. And I'm not sure digital collections count. The other would be my Riff Tracks collection on rifftracks.com, which is the Mystery Science Theater guys, Mike Nelson. If you listen to the show, you know what that is. Why am I explaining that? And I have several hundred. I have close to 400 movies on Vudu. So that's probably the closest I have to a collection today. I have a smattering of books, but I have hundreds of ebooks, and I have one physical CD because I bought one that was autographed from The Killers by Brendan Flowers. But I have, I'm going to have a music subscription. So I have access to what I feel like is from Amazon, all the music I could ever want for my family. I pay $15 a month. So I don't have, boy, this really ties into digital physical. It's interesting how these lines have crossed. I don't have a lot in terms of collections. Now, I have been a collector in the past, and I know we're going to get into that. I have been. But as of today, digital collections and memories. Sweet, sweet memories of my family.
That's beautiful, Dave.
Oh, and regrets. Oh, lots of regrets.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding about the regrets. But no, I mean, I really, truly, when it comes down to it, physical things, I don't collect anything right now.
So I'll get into what I collect here in just a minute, but I want to address something, and maybe we'll cover this in greater detail later, but now just seems like a good time. Why do you think digital collections do not count? Like what is your hesitation there?
I mean, I think it's I think that it's like, here is my collection of licenses to use a product as long as the company who is providing that product is able to do so, right? I'm not sure it's anything real. It's super convenient. It's what I choose to do. I found an economical way to do it. There's ways to build your digital collection economically, not by buying Slingshot for $25. That is not the way to do it, folks. But it's, I don't know if it counts because it's not tangible, right? I mean, you can't touch it. You can't show it off to anyone. It can't go in a museum, right? I know that those are not, those are just my opinions on it. But I don't know if that really does count. And I'd like to hear your thoughts, and maybe as we work through this, but does digital stuff, can you collect something digital? I guess you can collect anything, but is that really a collection, right? I don't know.
Interesting questions. And I see your points, and they are valid. And I do have an opinion about this, but I'm going to hold on to it for now. We're going to get to it. So for my part of this, my current collecting, I still collect. I collect arguably too much and too many things. But currently, video games, of course, are a big one that I collect. I collect books. I not only books that I want to read, but also I am a sucker for a beautiful leather-bound tome or a first edition or an autographed book. I love those things, and I also collect music in the form of CDs and to a lesser extent vinyl. I do have a small vinyl collection. I don't spend a lot of time on that one. If I'm going to buy music, it's probably going to be on a CD, just because I think that that's the perfect balance of a physical piece of music with the quality level that I want. And I could go on ad nauseum about the quality of vinyl versus everything else, but this is not that episode. That we're not going to do that.
I have a question about vinyl, because vinyl is beautiful, right? You get your big giant record, and it's like a poster, right? I mean, it's really cool. And then, and I mean, I'm talking about the sleeve, right? Just a beautiful poster. You pull the record out, it's really a neat, tangible thing. And we won't get into the quality because I have some opinions about that, but what gets me about vinyl is then people take it and then they put it on in the shelf, right? They slide it in, and you can't see anything. You can't see the beautiful vinyl, the artwork of the album, right? Which is blown up and huge and way bigger than a CD or a cassette, which is my preferred way to listen to music, is cassette or 8-track. But
cassette, nice, yeah,
but no, really though, I mean, that's something about vinyl I've never quite understood, is why do you store them like books, but you can't even read the spines? I don't know. Do you store them that way?
It's a conundrum. I store them in the milk crate.
But then you see the first one.
Right. You see the first one, you can leaf through them a lot easier. Because you're right. The spines, I mean, I can barely read the spine on a CD, let alone vinyl. Right. It's just, it's impossible.
It's because we're really old.
There is an element of that. Yeah, my eyesight is not what I wish it was. But you bring up an interesting point that not only applies to vinyl, but applies to collecting as a whole, which is, it is extraordinarily hard to store vinyl. And I have maybe, I don't know, 80 to 100 LPs. And even just having that many, that's heavy. like right. I don't like to move it, or like it'll probably stay with the house if we ever move. Is
that like 3 milk crates?
No, that's only 1 milk crate.
Really? Okay. All right.
Yeah, for like 80 to 100 vinyls. Maybe I bought a big milk crate. I don't know. But anyway, it's...
You buy a lot of milk.
Well... like my milk. Anyway.
Yep.
So it's very difficult to store it. Like, and if you had it all laid out to where you could see the covers, man, that would take probably more square footage on my walls than I have in my house. So how do you collect that and display it, and how do you enjoy it? I have the same problem with my video games. Like, I can't have all of them out. I can't have them all hooked up. I'm not one of these YouTubers who have the big wall of games behind them, not because I don't want to be, but because I just don't have the space to do it, and we have to live in my house. I don't get to devote half of it to a YouTube channel or a studio or anything like that. So that's a question I'm constantly asking myself, right? Is I have all these records, or I have all these video games, or I have all these books, and some of them are in tubs in a garage. And it's like, okay, then why do I have them?
Sure. Yeah, it's not very useful.
That question weighs on my mind. Yeah. Right, exactly.
The question you're describing, which is why do I have this? It's not very useful. Those are the things that go through my head as I ponder. It's one of the things that goes through my head as I ponder starting a collection. That that I do like. Well, man, if it's not useful over a certain period of time, then why have it, right? So, and things that have led me to abandon collections. I wish I was more like you. Maybe not to the extent, right? But I wish I was able to collect something. Because I struggle to collect anything. And I think as we go through our collections and our history with them, I think maybe we'll start to get a picture of how we both ended up on polar opposites of the collection aisle.
So let's take a trip to that past and tell me, what was the first thing you remember collecting?
Truly collecting, and not just having, but actually, going and seeking more and building it's like a mural, right? Like something you can display and demonstrate. Look, I have these things, and it says something about my tastes or about me, which I think that's what collecting is about. I think would be baseball cards. So as a kid, I loved baseball, and my brother also loved baseball, and he got me into baseball cards. And this was certainly of my life, my entire life, my largest collection. It's a collection that I kept the longest. I remember loving it. I had a decent collection. You and I, that I collected ball cards. I had a decent collection. I made a list of what I thought my best cards were. A Robin Yount rookie card, a 75 tops. A Mike Schmidt second year, which I think was like a 72 or 73 tops. A couple, Sandy Koufax and a Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale late careers. I think I had a card with both of them on there too. So decent cards, right? I mean, at the time, the Robin Yount card was worth a couple $100. Mike Schmidt was worth like 80. The Koufax and the Drysdale stuff, 50 or 60 each. I loved those cards. I loved having them. I loved collecting them. I started collecting in 85 and stopped in like 93. And I had a very large collection, several of the, whatever they call those baseball card. I don't remember what they call the baseball card boxes, but I had several of them. I truly enjoyed that. I enjoyed having them. I enjoyed going, I'm going to go look through my ball cards, and I'll sort them. And I'll try sorting them in a different way. People who are really serious about baseball cards, they are sorting them all the time, and I had to, and then at a certain point I realized that there was value to them early on. Then I had to get sleeves for them, and I had a lot of fun with it, hunting and trading, trying to work your way up to something. It was extremely satisfying and fun for me, and it's certainly the most memorable collection. I would not be able to do it today because I just simply don't have the interest in something like that. And I could get digital baseball cards. I can go and look at pictures of them online all I want. What's the earliest collection you can recall?
It's actually the same thing, but my experience with baseball cards is slightly different because I don't really know why I collected them. I enjoyed playing baseball, but I always hated watching baseball. Like I found it to be the most boring thing in the world. If you have to build a stretch into your game, that's a clue. Yes. Make it shorter. If baseball were 3 innings, I think I'd love it. But 9, I'm out. I can't do it. So I collected baseball cards not because a love of the sport or an interest in the game or anything like that. I collected baseball cards almost as like something to do. I could buy a pack. I could open it up. Yep. I didn't know what was inside it. We've done a podcast before on the thrill of the hunt. Yes. And that was really part of the appeal to me with baseball cards.
What are you going to get?
Was just hunting through. Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
So that's why I collected baseball cards. I didn't for a very long time, and I never amassed too great of a collection. But it was never about the players. It was never about the teams. It was always about, what am I going to get when I open that pack? Which is, it's probably a good thing that I never got into gambling, because that part of the brain, like that's the same thing firing, I think, right? So that was my earliest, was baseball cards.
And, when we did it, we were, being 80s kids, a lot of us did collect baseball cards. And, baseball cards were everywhere, and they were dirt cheap. You could buy a package of Topps baseball cards with that weird gum that was flavored like, I don't know what it was flavored like. It was flavored like weird gum. That's the only, there's no good description for it. But it's like 50 cents a lot of times, right? And always under $1 for different tops, whether it was Flair or Donruss. They were a little bit more expensive, and then Upper Deck ultimately was the premium ones that got really expensive. But they were everywhere. You go to the gas station, they're right there, and you could pick. And sometimes they would have last year's. They didn't sell enough of them that you could, it was a lot of fun. And it was so present and available, and it wasn't like there were shortages either. Like, it wasn't like Pokemon cards or some of the other stuff we'll probably talk about where there was scarcity involved. And there was always a package of Topps baseball cards at the gas station. You just could count on it. Even Garbage Pail Kids had scarcity things going on at the time, but baseball cards, there was plenty of them, which should tell you it's not a good thing to invest in because they were so overproduced by the 80s.
I'm really glad you said that, though, because I think the financial aspect of it is super important. And you're absolutely right. Baseball cards were cheap, and neither of us grew up with immense wealth, but we had enough allowance money or pocket money or could find change on the street where we could get a pack of baseball cards. And as we get into some of the other things that I've collected and kind of my experience with that, so many of them I have abandoned because I've been priced out of the market.
Yeah.
And baseball cards, even when I think you and I got to the point where the market started going a little crazy.
Yes.
And, because this would have been like 89, 90, maybe 91, somewhere in that.
I started in 85. You picked up at some point later. And then by the early 90s, I was out.
Yeah, and there was that period of time where like it became the vogue collectible, and everybody was collecting baseball cards. And so then suddenly you couldn't get that 50-cent pack anymore because everybody was printing on higher quality paper because they were trying to maximize their profits. And
they had holographic cards all of a sudden, and you were trying to get that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it got to a point where 10-year-old kids couldn't keep up anymore. I think that's a huge element of collecting that really affects people's ability to enjoy a hobby like this in a healthy way.
Yeah, for me it was about the players and the teams because I did really watch baseball. I still love to watch baseball, and I know it's not for everybody, right? I get it. I can't watch a basketball game. I find it really boring, even though there's constant action. It's moving so fast that I can't think about it, right? But with baseball moving at a slower pace, I could always, think about it, which it for some reason spoke to me. But you do mention being priced out, right? Which I think that for the next item that I collected was something that happened with that too, which was comic books. And comic books did something similar, right? In the mid 80s, comic books were dirt cheap. The quarter bin at the comic book store was ever present, like pork in your mouth. It was. You know what? No one's gonna get that joke. I regret saying it.
Listen, the right people will get that joke.
Oh, all right. You can cut it or you can leave it. But they were everywhere. They were everywhere. And they were cheap. And you could you go to the grocery store and you'd see the newsstand, and there would be what they used to call the newsstand, magazine racks, comic books, 75 cents. That was for a new one, just hot off the presses. But I love to collect comic books. I never had a huge collection. I traded a lot because I wanted to read new things, so I would trade. So I kept it varied. And so for me, there was certainly an element of collection, but it was also, I enjoyed reading the stories. So at a certain point, I would get rid of a part of the collection in order to get new stuff so I could experience a new story. I know you collected comic books as well, and I think you kept with it much, much longer than I did.
I did. I kept with comics for a very long time, and part of what I really enjoyed about collecting comics, as you mentioned, were the stories. Like, to me, this was a collection that actually had an additional use. Yeah. Whereas, like, baseball cards, once I found, the player or put the set together or whatever.
Like looking at a picture of it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's an intrinsic value to the comics with the story.
Yes. And so I never collected comics for value's sake. I collected them for story's sake. Yeah. And because my tastes were very different from the mainstream, I was able to carry on in kind of the cheap world of comic books a lot longer than maybe your average collector around the time that we were collecting. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I started at the 75-cent comic was what I remember. I don't ever remember a cheaper comic on the stand in my life.
Nope.
But
75.
75 cents was decent. But then they went up to $1.25, and then they went up to $1.75, and then they started doing the prestige books, which every once in a while was a joy. And you saw something on the shelf that was a little bit thicker, a little bit nicer, a little bit shinier, and you got excited, and you were like, "Ooh, what is this one shot?
This must be really good."
Exactly.
Yeah. And then they weren't. You would buy them, and they weren't good because every comic book looked like $1 million, but that didn't mean the story inside of it was very good. And if you cared about the story and you weren't looking at it like it's some sort of investment tool, then it was a huge disappointment, and it soured you on the whole process.
Right. And then two additional things happened in comics from my perspective, which is one, you talked about if you cared about the story, they started splitting that story up. And so then if you were not fortunate enough to get this certain issue of this certain comic, on launch day, it would sell out, and then you would be missing a chunk of the story.
Right.
And that drove me crazy as a completionist. I could not handle that. That really frustrated me.
Huge multi-title crossovers got so common that you had to buy like 15 different comic books from 8 different lines to get even a part of some of the stories, right? I mean, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which happened in the mid-'80s, really started that. And maybe from a storytelling perspective, having that long form is good. But the way it was managed and continued to be managed, it made it just a real headache for people to not just collect, but just be able to read the whole story. Because that's the point for a lot of us was, I just want to know what the story is.
It became hard to keep up. Right. So like, even if you didn't follow the story across all the different books and that sort of thing, they just flooded the market because their motivation is, sell more comics. And so the way you sell more comics is you produce more comics. And at that time, kind of like how we started low in baseball cards and then it kind of peaked up. The same thing happened to us with comic books as we started when nobody cared. And then suddenly everybody was caring. So they're pushing out so many different books. And there's, I think at one point when I stopped collecting, there were 6 unique Batman titles. It's like,
right.
Even as a fan, and even as a fan who was employed at that time, I couldn't keep up with that. I just didn't have the time.
There were 4
to chase
or 5.
all of that.
When we were buying comics for fun, right? There was Detective Comics, there was Batman Comics, there was Batman Shadow of the Bat, there was Legends of the Dark Knight, I think was that one. And there was probably another one in there too. I mean, that got kind of nuts. I did try, if I could tell a brief story, I did try to restart my comic book collection as a late teen. Right before I got married and moved out of the house, I was 18. We had a local comic book store close. I don't know if you remember the store. I'm sure you remember the store, the Comic Page. Yeah. And it was a little tiny comic book store in our town. That was a house. It was a house near our art museum. And it was, when I say it was a house, it was kind of a creepy old house. And they had their closing sale, and they opened up the basement, which had tons of comic books in there. I don't know if you went in there during the closing sale, but you go into the basement. And I remember I started to collect them again, and then I went to that, and I bought a ton of stuff. And I bought a lot because they were closing, and they were starting to really deeply discount things. I bought a lot of Swamp Thing, including the first appearance of John Constantine, Swamp Thing 27, I believe that's what it was. And I paid like $5 for it. And then I also bought a lot of Hellblazer, which is John Constantine's comic book. Now, for non-comic book fans, you may have heard the term John Constantine because there was the Keanu Reeves movie, and then there was the TV show that lasted a whole whopping 12 episodes or whatever it was on NBC. And then he was in Legends of Tomorrow or whatever that awful WB show. CW. WB hasn't been around for a while, I don't think. But I bought the John Constantine Hellblazer, which was a more mature comic book. And I rebuilt my collection, and I had them in my room. And for some reason, my mom decided to look through my collection, and she saw a comic book titled Hellblazer with a guy on the cover smoking, probably smoking and drinking. Many of the covers did. The Hellblazer covers were impressive works of art from a technical standpoint, even if you don't appreciate, a guy who looks like Sting smoking a cigarette and drinking. But and then she flipped through a few Constantine books, and then she threw out my entire comic book collection. And I was 18 at the time. Now, I have to say, in hindsight, the way she handled it was not right. But I would not read those books today. I probably would read the Swamp Thing ones because those were, I think, innocuous. But the Hellblazer books probably did go a little bit too far in terms of their horror, gothic, and often sort of blasphemous nature. So I probably would not read those today. And I probably would have if I found them in one of my kids' room. Have a very honest, frank conversation about how these things shouldn't be in our home. So I at the same time, while I joke about, hey, maybe throwing out my Batman and Swamp Thing comics wasn't cool, and it wasn't. And the X-Men comics and the Spider-Man comics and everything else I had bought as I tried to restart my collection. Losing it all, that was it. I was like, I'm out. I can't collect these things. I'm not starting over again. And but yeah, that was the last time I tried in earnest to collect comic books.
I'll have more to say about that idea of starting over as we progress a little bit more. But does that conclude your list of collecting, or you got more?
No, I've got one more. I got two more,
right.
with a bonus one and then another one. But I had tons of action figures when I was a kid. And at some point, I did start collecting them. And I mostly dealt with the superpowers, which were, the DC guys. A lot of nerdy comic book stuff. And Secret Wars, which were the Marvel ones. I have much, much fewer of those. And then Toy Biz had some Marvel stuff that came out. I actually had a few good superpowers. One, I had Shazam, Captain Marvel. I had Plastic Man. Those are relatively rare ones. And I also had a very good, and I think underappreciated, I personally underappreciated them, collection of Transformers and GoBots. And someone had asked me, hey, someone I was going to when I went to college very briefly said, hey, you got those? And I was like, yeah, I haven't done anything with them in a long time. By the way, GoBots, you're like, what's a GoBot? A GoBot was like the trailer park version of Transformers.
Yeah.
Poor kids had the GoBots, but I collected these over many years. And there's a kid that said, yeah, man, I collect Transformers. I'd like to look at your stuff. And so I brought it to him, like, here you go. You can look at it and give me a price. And I never seen the kid again. And I thought I knew who he was. I had his phone number. He wouldn't answer. He just stole my Transformers collection. I let it go. I wish I wouldn't have. And then one more thing that I had, this is not, I don't know if this is collecting, but I kind of viewed it as that, was I had Mystery Science Theater VHS tapes that I had recorded off TV. And I'd probably had like 30 or 40 of them, maybe 100, 115 episodes, something like that. But I had a ton of those on VHS, recorded commercials and all. I did eventually toss those out voluntarily and switch to a fully digital collection. But I did have those that I kind of regret. I don't know. I wish I just had one of them. I don't need to have like all 40 of them, but I would love to have just one of them that maybe like, Catalina Caper or one of those classic episodes that I could find a VCR and then fire up and watch it with in the traditional sense. But those were the things that I really I collected as a kid, and as a kid I say, and then I got married, and then I was a kid with a wife. This is probably the best way to describe it. But I got a whole lot more serious about, I did not have the same level of disposable income, and, other things interest me, and I stopped collecting as much. And from that point, I would say the collections became more, they were very brief, and they were attempts, and they failed, and then I would walk away. I think probably the best one was my Sega Saturn collection that I did buy shortly after we got married. I bought a Saturn and collected, I had over 20 games, maybe close to 30 games, including Resident Evil, which was one of the better games I had in my collection. And I absolutely, I don't remember why I got rid of them. I don't remember why or how. I totally regret getting rid of my Saturn. I wish I still had it to this day. That's one I could say, man, I wish I still had it. I also wish I still had my action figures. I did churn those action figures through a series of trades and sales into a washer and dryer. So they did have value, and I was able to get a washer and dryer, which is, hey, that's a responsible thing to do. But I will say, after I got married, my collecting interest in my ability, and then when I later, got older and made more money and had disposable income that I could, I just was no longer interested in collecting, or I had tried to collect, and knowing my own personality, right, my rules around things have to be useful in order for me to keep them, I would either get rid of them after they weren't useful for a period of time, or also knowing that I've got like this tendency to overdo it, I would stop myself before I overdid it, because I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to collect, I don't know, say I'm going to collect first editions. And I'm afraid I would go of books. I'm afraid I would go, not first editions, like that's a band, I think, maybe from the 50s. I'd be afraid I would go on eBay and buy like 20 first editions and get an Insta collection, which you can do on eBay now, which kind of takes the fun out of it. I'm afraid I'd go overboard, right? And so I've moderated to the point where I just no longer do it, because I moderated so much, because it just wasn't something I was felt like was right for me to have a collection for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just real quick, I'm just going to list off.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped way ahead.
No need to apologize. So I'm just going to list off quickly the other things that I've collected in my life that I no longer collect. And I don't think we need to go into details. Just throw these out there. I did action figures for a while too, mostly Star Wars. That was my main focus of action figure collecting. And then also Magic cards. That
was a big deal. I don't know. Is it so much now?
It's still
okay?
Huge.
I'm not going to pretend to know.
And you want to talk about getting priced out of a market. Like, that happened quickly. But I legitimately love the game. Like, I think it is a super fun game. And there was a while that my son and I played regularly, but it got to the point where I gave up collecting Magic cards, not because I wanted to, but because I was just like, I've got too many. I can't spread myself this thin. And so I've got to stop collecting something. And part of the reason I mention that is you made that comment that if it's not useful, you get rid of it.
Yes.
And I am the exact opposite, because I've gotten rid of so many things that I regretted and that I wished I'd held on to, that I tend to hold on to everything. And I don't want to paint a picture of like, I'm a hoarder and I have to just, scoot through my stacks of newspapers. It's not that kind of a situation, but I rarely sell, a book, even if I've read it, because I'm like, well, there may come a time when I want to read it again. And if I want to read it again, I don't want to have to go out and snag another copy. I want to be able just to go to my shelf and pull it off. So that is a lot of the psychology of my collecting is I will buy a game that I think someday I will want to play this. I will not buy a game thinking I'm going to go home and play this now, but I'm thinking when the mood strikes me, I want to have access to it, immediate access to it. But there's another psychological component, because you would say, well, Chris, you can have immediate access to any album in the world.
Yep.
Why do you buy CDs?
Amazon Music, and
right.
And I can get it in, I can get a lot of albums at Atmos, right? Things that I couldn't do if I had the physical media. There's a lot of digital options that allow me instant access to anything in formats and in qualities that I can't get, if I was to go buy a CD.
But the flip side of that is I have lived through situations where they would do a remaster of an album, throw it up on Apple Music or Spotify or Amazon Music, and it is garbage. And so then the album that I grew up with, that I know back and forwards, that I know exactly how it's supposed to sound, suddenly doesn't sound that way. So the other element, psychological element to my collecting, is preservation.
Yeah. I like this one. I want to keep this.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody changing it behind the, editing it, changing it, inserting something, doing a George Lucas and, ruining it, right? I mean,
right.
It's fair.
Exactly. So that's like, these are the things that I fight with. And I also fight with the money output. Like, I am blessed to have a wife that is like, if you want it and we can afford it, I'm not going to stop you. So I don't worry about that, but I try to be responsible. I try not to go into debt for these things. And if, even if it's like the ultra rare thing, if I can't afford it, you can't afford it. I mean, that's just life, right? So you move on from it. So I think I am responsible in that regard, but there's certainly still a balance, and there's certainly still a lot of things that, is it the right thing to do? So that leads me to, I think, the next big bullet point question in this conversation.
Can I ask one question? You mentioned the ultra rare thing, and they do get really expensive. Do you feel like, as a collector, that buying reproductions, and knowing it's reproduction, not passing it off as look, I got an NES gold cart from the World Championship in 1991, and look, I know I didn't just buy it on Temu for $7. Do you? But do you feel like there's a cheapness to that, or do you think that that's okay? That hey, it fills out my collection, it gives me something tangible to look at that is something I like, that's reflective of my interests. I don't care if it's original or not.
I've been burned pretty bad on repros in my collecting life, so they are not something that I will buy. Now, if somebody else understands what they're getting into and is fine with it, absolutely. And again, with one of my big goals being preservation, if that's the way the game is available, no problem. I'm all for it. But I purchased a couple of repros to kind of dip my toe in, and they were fundamentally flawed. And that left a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah. Because
I'm looking for that experience, which I can't get through like Nintendo Switch Online, where you download the games and you're emulating like things like that. Like you can't get that legitimate experience. And I'm also the kind of video game collector that still has a giant CRT TV, because the refresh rate is different from it, it is on an HD TV. So
what CRT do you have?
I've got a Sony PVM production video monitor. Okay, so one of the really high end, like that, existed in the television stations.
Everyone wants that. That's all the reading and everything. If you're into old school 480. Whatever, not 480, but whatever, the NTSC standard.
286.
Yes.
Or not 86, 283 or something like that. Anyway, so I'm like, I'm that deep into the mire. I'm, because I'm trying to recreate the experience. If I want to play The Legend of Zelda, there are a million ways I can do that, but there's only one way I can do it, with an actual cartridge on an actual NES on an actual CRT. Right. And that's to have those things.
Yes.
Right. So this kind of forces me to beg the question, is this healthy?
Yeah. I'm perfectly fine with what you described, right? Like, sure, it would be cool to sit down if I want to play a game of Mario 3 to play it on the original stuff on that TV. It would be neat, but to me, that's a novelty. And if I can access it with my hacked NES or with one of those carts that stores, Evercarts or whatever they call them, that stores all the video games on it in a memory card, and play through a system that has HDMI access, I play it without scan lines. You know what? That's fine, because I don't have to have the exact experience that I had as a kid. That doesn't bother me. I can make it work in my head so that I'm satisfied with a diluted, watered down, whatever, a changed experience. So the question is it healthy? I don't know. I mean, as long as you're not going into debt over it. You hear that, Larry? It's for our good friend Larry at the Retro Gamers. We like to joke with about his spending habits around video games. Everybody go check out the Retro Gamers podcast. They're great, Larry and Anthony. But no, as long as you're not going into debt over it and putting your family at risk, right? I mean, this would be kind of like saying, yeah, I occasionally like to go to Vegas and hit the tables and throw the dice, and if I lose a couple $100, that's fun money. Or say, yeah, I like to go there and I lost the house, right? There's a difference, right? And I think that I think the healthiness depends on, are you hurting anything? Are you harming anything by doing that? And I don't think you are harming anything by doing it. I don't think most people are not. Now, if it becomes habitual, if you're keeping every newspaper you've ever read, and I've heard those stories about people.
Oh, sure.
That they can't function in their own home because their home is so full of stuff. Then that's where it becomes unhealthy, right? When it comes between relationships, when it comes with work and living, and you got mice living in your collection because it's so large. But I think that just really doing your best to capture the authentic collection, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, on the other hand, I think my inability to collect may be unhealthy, right? Like I just don't want attachments. Like I haven't, part of it is like I have enough going on in my life, right? That these collections are a bit stressful for me, right? Like, I'm collecting, but I didn't buy a Nintendo game this week. I'm afraid I would have that kind of anxiety that I would be like, I got to do more. This is not a good enough collection. I got to try to work my way up. It would cause me some anxiety because I know when I get into something, I like to do it great. And so I'm very selective about what I get into because I really want to do a good job. So I don't spread myself thin. In fact, if anything, I probably don't do enough because I would hyper focus on things. Yeah, so it's very interesting. That's why the digital collections work, because it were collections, right? And the folks are doing the scare quotes because I don't know if that's truly a collection. But for me, it works because it's not in my face. You know what I mean? And, I am not like reminded, I've only got 298 Voodoo movies. Although I have to admit, when I was at the 200, getting ready to cross over to 300, I did buy some movies just to get myself over 300 because I wanted that as a milestone. And at first, when I did start collecting Voodoo, my wife would tell you that I bought a lot of movies we didn't need or would ever watch to try to bump my numbers up. So I probably went a little silly with that too. But it's not so bad because it's not in your face. And the whole usefulness question, because you don't see it, you don't see the usefulness aspect, and there's not a way to get rid of it, so it's not, you know what I mean? So, I don't know, it was just much easier for me, and it just kind of worked with how I mentally do things, which is, for a while, last year, I thought I'm going to start collecting modded consoles. And so, like, in the span of a month, I bought like 6, I'm not joking, 6 modded consoles. I only have 2 of those left because I sold all of them because I realized, oh, wait, I got silly. And now I don't collect modded consoles. I have 2 that I will play that are useful, right? And so I separated the whole collection. I think that my current mindset, I just can't collect. I wish I could. I wish I could find that happy medium. I think maybe you and I are on 2 different sides of the same collecting coin.
Yeah, it seems that way. But I'm glad you came back to the digital question, because I would submit to you that it absolutely counts and that it is absolutely a valid form of collecting, because I think it's hitting the same emotional beats that I've been talking about, as we've been having this conversation. Because I have some digital collections as well. I run my own Plex server, and boy, I'm thrilled every time I get a new CD or DVD. I rip it, I throw it onto my Plex server, and I love that. And watching that number go up is the exact same as you were just describing about watching your Voodoo number go up. So I think if somebody was like, I collect digital video games or I collect digital movies, I think that's perfectly valid, and I don't see a real discrepancy. I mean, I guess the only difference is you can't resell the collection, or right. And you can't leaf through it. Yep. You can't display it very easily, right? But aside from those things, I think it's still a completely valid collection.
But you described those 3 things you described are the reasons why I can have a digital collection.
Right. Yeah, right. So it works for you.
Because that works for me. Because if I could see them and display them, I would be constantly concerned that I don't have enough. And then at a certain point, I'd be like, oh, how did I get all this crap that I'm never going to use? And I'd sell it for pennies on the dollar. And it would be like, and everyone would be like, Dave, why did you do this again? I know. I think that's why the digital stuff works for me, because it just works with my mental model of how I view the world and the utility of things. And it's also super convenient, right? And I despise clutter. TMAG Studios is a cluttered place. TMAG Studios, but you walk into the rest of my house, it's not cluttered. I despise it. I like things orderly, and I like them like spotlessly clean, and I would really struggle with like having too much stuff, and then I would get into, okay, well, now I've got to frame all this stuff, and it's got to be framed right, so I got to go to Michael's and have them frame it. $300 later, I'd be like, hey, I just had a framed copy of the Spice World PS1 game. I spent $380 to get that thing done. What have I done? What have I done?
Right.
But, another thing that I have channeled my energy into other interests that I find very, like, utilitarian, right? We spend a lot of money upgrading our house. We spend a lot of money on our yard. You know what I mean? In energy. I love home theater stuff. And I don't buy, like, super expensive home theater stuff, but I cycle through it because I want to try new things. So I've been through 4 home theaters in the last 2 years just because I love trying them out, right? And I don't buy, most of the stuff I buy is $1,000 or under, so it's not expensive stuff, and I resell it, and I never make all my money back, because first of all, I'm a terrible businessman, but also because I know there's going to be a loss. That's okay. I just accept that. So it's not like I collect home theaters because I only have one set of speakers or whatever, a sound bar or whatever it is, at a time. But I do like the varying experiences and collecting that knowledge. So somebody says to me, "Yeah, I'm thinking about getting this 5000 series Sony with with Atmos." I'd be like, "Yeah, I had that one. Let me tell you what I liked and what I didn't like, and which sub you can." I can do that with a lot of them, and I can also, the ones I didn't own, I probably read about 18 different reviews on and some technical specs, and I could, so the varying experiences. I like that, keeping it changing up, and I just, by keeping stuff, I feel like I would get a little stagnant. I don't know.
No, that's interesting, and I'm going to tell one more anecdote that I think throws this into an interesting light, and then we can wrap up unless you have something else that you want to add to it. But I had an experience recently, and this, for a little bit behind the scenes, this was an episode topic that I suggested we do for the podcast. And the reason I suggested we do this is specifically because of this experience that I had. And I thought, oh, this is making me think about things that I thought were pretty rock solid in my life, and now I'm looking at them in a different light. So recently I had a situation where, I do video work professionally, and I needed to get some additional equipment in order to make some things work. And it wasn't something that I could just purchase from money that I'd earned doing the work. It was a strange situation. So I had the crossroads to decide, am I going to basically put this on credit, or am I going to liquidate some of my collection and use that money to get these things that...
Because this is expensive stuff you're talking about.
Right.
This is not like a $30 capture card.
Right, exactly.
From Wish.com.
Yeah, no.
You're talking professional level stuff.
That's exactly right. That's what I'm talking about. And the goal is to get to a better place than I'm currently in. You want to grow everything as you do it. So it was a situation of, do we put this on a credit card? Do I live without it? Or do I liquidate some of my collection? And I made the choice to liquidate some of my collection. I don't have, again, I said earlier, I don't have one of these YouTube collections, but I have a lot, and I have some stuff that is fairly high dollar. So I went through and I thought, okay, why do I have some of this stuff? Is there an emotional connection there? Is there a nostalgic collection? Or did I just end up with something because I knew it was more valuable and I was able to get it for a good deal, or it just happened to land in my collection, like that kind of a thing? So I came up with a decent stack of things that I was like, you know what? I can let go of these things. They do not have to belong in my collection. And I sold them, and I sold them for fair amounts, and I got the money that I needed, and then I got the equipment that I needed. And what surprised me was how good it felt to get rid of some stuff.
Wow.
And that I did not expect. I mean, I agonized over this decision because, as I said earlier, a lot of the reason I collect is because I think, oh, down the road, I'm going to want this. I'm going to want access to it. I'm going to want to be able to go to my shelf and pull it off. But now, as a much older collector, I got to the point where it was like letting go felt amazing.
Did you feel like a weight was taken off you, like a responsibility to have? You had these things and you weren't using them.
Right. And you made that comment earlier about how stressful you found like this acquisition and caring for the collection and doing these sorts of things. I get that, right? Like, I'm not into a situation where, I'm just going to liquidate everything. Like, no, I legitimately enjoy this stuff. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. But it has changed the way I look at it. So that's a whole other wrench to throw into this conversation. It's like, okay, and some people will listen to this and say, well, yeah, you've matured. Like, you don't need to do this. Yeah. And other people will listen to this and they'll say, oh, that's the worst thing a collector can do. And you're out of the club now, like that kind of a thing, or whatever. But it was just such an interesting moment. And it was something that, like we do, I started trying to work it all out and try to figure out, what does this mean and how does this affect me going forward? And I think the biggest thing that it affected is it's okay. And I came to the conclusion that, God forbid, if my house caught fire and everything burned to the ground, would I restart my video game collection? I would not. And that's where I am now. And I still love it. I still have a ton of stuff. I still use a ton of stuff. I still want to play on the CRT as opposed to, playing emulated on my PC or even Nintendo emulation on my Switch or whatever. There's something to me about sticking a physical thing into a physical thing and playing it the way that I did when I was 11 years old. Like, that still means a lot. But also, it's just stuff.
That is a really interesting story. I'm sure that there are plenty of collectors who have probably gone through that and probably have a cycle similar to that, right? Like the build up and then some sort of like right sizing of their collection, and then moving forward with just the things that they felt like they needed. That's really interesting. And if Voodoo headquarters, which is now Fandango, ever burns down and I lose my digital collection, I will start it over. I absolutely will. I hope that they're on that thing called the cloud that I keep hearing about. These kids keep talking about that. That if their headquarters burned down, that the headquarters up in the sky, in the clouds,
would be fine.
It would be fine because it's floating up there and there's no fire up there in the sky. I want to mention one more collection thing because I had written it down and I thought it was funny. Was that I remember a time before DVDs, I had a good VHS collection. A good size VHS. And I remember collecting widescreen as well as THX VHS collection.
Yes.
And now that VHS, the idea of a THX VHS, that's just ridiculous. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing? Like,
but they had that opening animation.
They did have the opening
so
animation.
Great.
And you could hear it in Dolby Pro Logic if you had a Dolby, which
Yes.
I did not have. But it was hilarious. Like they added one extra scan line. I think I got one more line of resolution. It's awesome. That's pretty horrible, hard to watch. Even on the best TV, your Sony Vega or Wega, I don't know which one it was called, is either 1W or 2Vs. To this day, I don't know, even though I owned one. Regular standard definition TV or one from Walmart, a Sanyo, that had a hummed every time you turned it on. They both looked pretty bad with VHS. It's just funny that I thought THX VHS were things you would want to own.
Guilty. I did that too.
Yeah, I know. I knew you were going to say that. And widescreen ones. Let's make this 21-inch screen. Let's smush everything. And
well, that was not a mistake. I'm still glad I bought all those widescreen VHS tapes.
Do you have any of them? I don't think you. I bet you don't.
I still have Laserdisc. I do not have any VHS.
Laserdiscs are different though, because like
Yes.
records. They're like a showpiece. No, really, they're like a showpiece.
You're right. You're right.
You can display them. They're cool. They're also kitschy, right? And VHS just seems sad, whereas Laserdisc seems cool now, right? I mean, everything has its cycle, and Laserdisc is in its day now. I'm sure VHS is having will have its day. But I mean, I think that to get back to our question about collecting, why do we collect? And is our two approaches to collecting healthy? I would say that we both could stand to come a little bit closer to the center from our respective sides.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is true of most extremism, right? Just come on in just a little bit. But I think why we collect, I think it's to, I don't know. I think I tried to explain that with the baseball cards, but it's trying to paint a picture of the things that you love through this collection, which is why the whole digital thing still, I questioned its collection, the collectability, right? Because no one really sees that. But there's something about it, like, look how much I love the Kansas City Royals. I've got this George Brett baseball card. And there's something about that. And I think that nostalgia plays an element of it as well, but it's also still showing the things that you love, because people collect things that they're not necessarily nostalgic for. I mean, lots of people collect like cartoon cells from 1940s and 50s cartoons when they weren't alive then. Our good friend Larry from the Retro Gamers podcast loves to collect Popeye stuff, right? I can guarantee you Popeye wasn't that big in the 80s. It was bigger at a different time, but he still loves it and connects with it. And that's cool and that's great. So it's not just nostalgia. There's still something there. I think it's beyond nostalgia. It says something about who you are as a person in a way that is harder to do with just words, right? That people could collect art when it's not an investment piece. I think that there's something to it. It's like, this is something about me you can see outwardly without me using a single word. You can tell from my Super Mario Brothers that I've got mounted to the wall and framed that these things are important to me. And I think that part is really healthy, really cool. That's why I wish I was a little bit more towards the center.
Yeah, well said. You're right. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think we just leave it there.
Well, Chris, you want to tell them where folks can find us if they want to hear more? They want to communicate with us. Maybe they'll tell us about their collections. Maybe the time they burn down their house to get insurance money. Listen, folks, we're not mandatory reporters. No one's going to believe us in court anyway. So you can tell us all about that.
Yes, I guess maybe if you want to. But the collections, I'd love to hear about other people's collections, and I'd love to hear what they think about this topic and where they sit, as far as the spectrum goes. So yes, they can find us at 2middleagedguys.com. That is 2, the numeral 2, middleagedguys.com. From there, you can email us. From there, you can find us on Facebook. You can get links to all the different places that you can listen to the podcast. And hey, you know what? If you like it, why don't you pick one of those places and leave a review? Maybe like on Apple Podcasts, where it really helps out the show. That would Absolutely. Be fantastic. Send us a note, send us a letter. We love reading all of the listener messages, and we like responding to them on the show. So that's always a highlight of each episode for us. So check us out, 2middleagedguys.com.
Thanks, everybody.